A chaotic war scene unfolds, where soldiers groaned in pain, begging for a sip of water amidst the devastation. Amidst all of that, the female protagonist stood there, her eyes wide with confusion, observing the battlefield around her. The soldiers, their bodies tattered and covered in blood, were preparing for another assault. The intensity of the battle intensified with each passing second. However, she remained stunned, unable to comprehend what was happening. Tori Noel, that's his name. Tori is his given name, and Noel is his surname. In his previous life, he was a professional gamer in Japan. That's right. In the world of gaming, he once reigned supreme. Now, Tori Noel is trapped in a new world, reborn as a girl. And not just any ordinary girl, she's a military medic. In the past, in the world of gaming, he was a legend with a gun in his hand. But this is nothing like what he knew. While Tori was still trying to piece everything together, a voice rang out, pulling her back to reality. Her commander was shouting at her, telling her to stop daydreaming and quickly follow orders. It was at that moment that she realized this wasn't a game. There was no reset button, no chance to start over. Blood stained her flesh. Her teammates fell one by one like flies. This was reality, and it was utterly terrifying. As if things weren't bad enough, another voice rang out, cutting through the chaos. Her commander was calling someone trash and issuing threats. It was becoming unbearable, but Tori didn't have time to worry. She rushed through the battlefield, stumbling on your own 2 feet amidst the chaos. And of course, at that very moment, her vision was momentarily obscured. But before anything worse could happen, her commander intervened just in time, taking down the enemy with a single blow. He was so confident it bordered on arrogance, sarcastically remarking that Tori was just taking up space, and then suggested ending the mission here for the day. Overwhelmed by a sense of defeat, Tori knelt down, muttering apologies for his cowardice. But when she stood up and looked around, there were piles of corpses, soldiers, and enemies alike, indistinguishable. She thought to herself, 58 meters. That's the distance the national border shifted today. And because of that, 800 soldiers sacrificed their lives. A truly great victory, as her commander sarcastically remarked. But Tori wasn't sure if it really was a victory. Tori Noel's commander soon calculated how to exploit her for other purposes, while also planning to inform her family of her heroic death as if it were an honor. As night fell, Tori tried to enjoy his meal, but all she could taste was the metallic tang of blood. Clearly, this wasn't an easy meal to swallow. Her commander suddenly mentioned the healing spell, wondering why she hadn't used it yet. Tori, with her usual awkwardness, confessed that she really didn't know how to use it. It turned out she'd been forced into military service and assigned to hastily teach herself healing. As a result, she was now struggling to make do as a medic on the battlefield. Everyone was stunned by the confession, while her commander chuckled, wondering why she had agreed to participate in the first place if she wasn't ready for it at all. Tori Noel reminisces about her past and the path that led her here. She simply wants to contribute to the orphanage where she grew up. He wanted to keep his promise to his childhood friend, Bernie, who had always dreamed of becoming an officer. And then, in her past life, she thought she would be an outstanding warrior. Top-notch gaming skills equate to military genius, right? But in her very first battle, things didn't go as she imagined. A surprise attack ended with her being completely burned to ashes. Tori broke free from her unrealistic thoughts. Despite everything she'd gone through, she still wanted to dedicate herself to her country. Tori Noel's commander punched her hard, calling her a complete idiot. But she couldn't do otherwise. She was just a girl trying to do the right thing, even if it meant getting beaten up badly. Despite his rudeness, her commander had to admit that, for her age, she had a rather mature demeanor. He urged her to quickly improve her skills and promised to introduce her to a seasoned medic. As they continued forward, he warned Tori not to step on the corpses, pointing out that they were infested with maggots. She couldn't help but reflect on the harshness of war. Even though this is a fantasy world, the brutality of conflict is clearly evident. There are no dragons, no mythical heroes, only humans, plunged into endless bloody battles. A cruel reminder that war, no matter the world, is always chaotic. Turi Noel and the commander arrived at a grim scene, Black Tag Yard, where countless bodies lay scattered across the ground. Her commander began explaining the tradage system, a method of classifying wounded soldiers in wartime, red cards for those needing immediate treatment, yellow cards for those stable but requiring monitoring, and green cards for minor injuries. Then he mentioned black cards, a word steeped in fear, making the atmosphere heavy. With a touch of irony mixed with experience, Tori reflects on his own circumstances, subtly alluding to his orphanage background. Not long after, the commander called Gale, the chief medic, to help Turi cope with the harsh realities of military medicine. Gale, after a rather uncomfortable introduction from the commander, Turi's protector, decides to take Turi Noel under her tutelage. She frankly pointed out the cruelty of Commander Garback, a man known for his cold-blooded leadership, his fearlessness in the face of death, and his willingness to sacrifice his subordinates without hesitation. This was a bitter truth that Turi found hard to accept. She began to regret volunteering for military service, the harsh realities of the military, where human lives are treated as disposable resources, were a heavy burden on her. Gale, while acknowledging this cruel reality, warned Turi that if she wanted to survive, she had to obey all the rules. If she didn't obey, her family would receive nothing. Those words were etched into Turi's mind. Gale gently encouraged Turi Noel to do her best. And most importantly, survive the madness ahead. Turi continued his training, carefully bandaging a simple wound on a patient. Gale observed and was quite impressed with her skills, remarking that this was perfect practice for future healing magic. Although the injury didn't seem serious, Turi couldn't help but feel that everything was insignificant compared to the chaos engulfing him. Gale gently stroked her head, appreciating her potential, but also regretting that she had to serve under a brutal commander like Garback. When the training session ended, Gale congratulated Turi. She was now officially a medic. Looking down at the new armband she'd been given, Turi felt grateful. But at the same time, she understood her own limitations. Turi Noel couldn't use healing magic more than twice a day, a limitation that worried her. Gale, as always, patiently encouraged her to continue training. She began teaching her the basics of mani shielding, a form of defensive magic that can create an energy shield to reduce damage in critical situations. Although not a perfect layer of protection, it can still make a difference at the right time. Turi gradually realized its value, not only to himself but also to his teammates. But the real challenge has only just begun. The following morning, Turi faced a grueling training session, where Garback, as always, showed no mercy. He roughly kicked the soldiers to their feet, ordering them to immediately take their positions. Turi struggled to his feet, his whole body aching from the grueling training the previous day. But when she looked around, she realized the other soldiers weren't much better off. One of them, Salsa, happened to catch her eye. Garback continued to press the troops, roaring ruthless orders and pushing them all forward without a shred of mercy. Turi Noel was completely absorbed in the preparations for the infiltration mission. He stood in line with the other soldiers. Mara, one of the senior officers, stood at the front of the formation, outlining the plan and dividing the units into different directions. As she listened to the orders, Turi couldn't help but reflect on the current situation. She recognized the ruthlessness of her superiors and understood that the chances of many of them surviving the day were very high. She was just a small cog in this brutal machine of war. Perhaps she had been too naive before, but now the true madness of war was becoming clear to her. Turi suddenly remembered a story an old doctor had once told her. A story about the land near the Tar River, a place that used to be a lush green meadow with soft brown soil. But now all that remains is a gloomy, almost ghostly scene, with the ground stained a strange black color. The main culprit is iron from blood, which has seeped deep into the earth after countless battles. They dyed the entire area red until the landscape itself changed. Standing in the middle of the battlefield, Turi Noel couldn't help but wonder, could the soil beneath her shoes be mixing with the ashes of those who were once loved by someone? But one thing was certain of her. She had no intention of becoming a part of this mournful ground. With unwavering determination, Turi clung to the platoon commander's position, running as fast as if her life depended on it. And indeed it did. In front, Garbak, with his characteristic sarcastic tone, he casually commented on the performance of the magic team, who were raining meteorites down on the enemy castle. A classic tactic: bomb first, then let the infantry clean up. Salza, with his usual enthusiasm, was thrilled by the magic show and kept pestering Turi Noel to borrow his binoculars. Garbak just grumbled, utterly bored, about how the magic team was being a bit too idle. They can flaunt their strength from a distance, while infantrymen face imminent danger. Who would have thought that war could have such an unfair division of labor? Suddenly, Salsa came up with a great plan: to bomb the enemy to the ground. Turi, deciding to play along with the joke, also wondered, why don't they just do that all the time? Garbak sighed, the kind of sigh one gets when you've had to explain this too many times. He lazily repeated, budgets aren't magic. They don't just appear out of thin air. Those grandiose spells cost expensive magic stones. Indiscriminate bombing without identifying enemy positions is like flipping a coin for good luck. The team continued forward, only to be confronted with a scorched field, empty, devoid of people. Just when everything seemed suspiciously quiet, Salsa, true to his nature, spotted something glittering and lunged forward. Of course, it was a trap. Flames flared up, chaos erupted. Garbak cursed under his breath while Salsa thrashed about, screaming in pain. Turi Noel, in a panic, yelled at him to roll to the ground. Salsa's screams confirmed that the fire was indeed very hot. Turi, momentarily stunned by a fleeting memory, quickly regained his composure and rushed to save him. They both tumbled to the ground in a clumsy rescue attempt. Salsa screamed in pain from a leg injury. Meanwhile, Turi bent down to examine her burns. They looked worse than any boss fight in an online game she had ever encountered. Taking a deep breath, Turi tried to use her healing spell, but the first attempt was like trying to start a campfire in the pouring rain. However, after a moment of struggle, the magic finally took effect. Salsa's wounds gradually healed, leaving him stunned as if he had just discovered a real-life cheat code. Despite trying to appear calm, Turi couldn't ignore the astonishment clearly visible on his teammates' faces. Salsa stood up, staggering slightly before grimacing and complaining that his legs still felt like they were on fire. Realizing he was exhausted and unable to carry the boy any further, Turi suggested they both move while they still had the chance. Not wanting to die because of a terrible stroke of bad luck, Salsa gritted his teeth and struggled to keep running. Meanwhile, the sky behind them lit up with hurtling meteors, adding drama to an already chaotic situation. While running, Salsa shouted that he hadn't even had a chance to repay his mother. Turi thought that if he had the strength to shout, he also had the strength to run. Every step was a battle. Pain tore through her body. Her breath reeked of blood, but adrenaline kept her standing. Game skills are now useless because this is reality, not a game. They continued to move forward, and Salsa spotted the camp, a wave of relief washing over him. But Turi couldn't go any further. Her legs gave way, and she collapsed to the ground. Salsa rushed over, trying to lift her up amidst the chaos. Garbak appeared, annoyed but immediately ordered medical attention. In her dazed state, Turi sensed Salsa still frantically checking to see if she was alive. Turi felt like a nobody in a world where survival was everything. But perhaps, just perhaps, this was the beginning of her becoming someone. Garbak yelled, furious that Turi had used healing magic without permission and disobeyed orders to save Salsa. She was still dazed, her mind hazy, almost unable to process his angry lecture. To emphasize his point, Garbak punched her in the head, reminding her that they were incredibly lucky to have returned unharmed. He emphasized that if the situation worsened, Turi might not even be strong enough to save anyone, let alone help him. The punches continued to rain down as Garbak continued to berate and criticize her for risking her life to save a rookie instead of obeying orders. Tori mumbled an apology and collapsed, admitting she had no excuse. Just as Garbak was about to continue, Gale intervened, telling him to stop, reminding him that Tori was still recovering. Garbak sternly warned Tori that her healing abilities existed for only one reason: for him, the commander. That was the sole reason he needed a medical practitioner, to be able to penetrate deeper into enemy lines and end the war more quickly. Turi's face was swollen, blood was still oozing out, and she tried to speak. But it was immediately interrupted when Garbak announced the punishment: no lunch, and having to stand in front of his tent until sunset. Turi nodded slightly, then quietly walked to his position. Despite the gnawing hunger, Salsa approached, looking apologetic, and offered an apology. But Turi only shook her head slightly, insisting that she herself had chosen to disobey orders. Salsa was silent for a moment, then, full of regret, admitted that without her, he probably wouldn't be alive. Turi reassured him that he didn't need to feel guilty, reminding him that he owed her something. Salsa joked that Turi was now his goddess, and she chuckled softly, suggesting a dinner to make up for it. Salsa laughed, agreeing that hunger was understandable, especially without lunch. Tori remained standing, knowing he couldn't leave before sunset. Salsa, still feeling guilty, went to report to Garbak. Turi watched him enter the tent, thinking that indifference was understandable in a world where few could survive. A moment later, Garbak's voice rang out. Then Salsa staggered out, covered in bruises. Turi, stunned, asked what had happened, and Salsa confessed that he had forgotten about the midday briefing. Turi fell silent, accepting that Garbak was both ruthless and unpredictable. Salsa, suppressing her pain, asked Turi for treatment, but she refused, knowing she was in trouble for using magic without permission. Salsa then revealed that Garbak had also forbidden him from eating dinner. Turi was stunned, reflecting on the harsh reality they were living in. Determined, she told Salsa that they had to do everything they could to survive. Encouraged by her unwavering resolve, Salsa vowed to do her best. Turi reflected on her new life, realizing that without any special abilities or tricks, she had to face war head-on in this unfamiliar world. Sitting among the soldiers, she pondered her position as a second-rate medical practitioner. Somehow, Turi survived despite facing brutal superiors, unpredictable friends, and countless troubles. But she kept moving forward, all because of the orphanage that had raised her. Today, once again, the order has been given to march into the endless whirlwind of chaos on the battlefield. The situation was extremely bleak. For the past 10 years, the Austin Empire and the Sabbath Federation had been locked in a constant struggle at the Tar River, where Turi was stationed. The most intense heat wave on the front line, known as the Western Front, saw them pushed off the riverbank and now completely under enemy control. The place where Salsa nearly lost his life is rapidly becoming an enemy camp. The plan this time, a surprise attack on the enemy's position, before the enemy can fully establish themselves. Turi felt uneasy. After all, they had failed once, and now they were being asked to repeat that risky tactic. But orders are orders. Just then, Garbak's voice interrupted her thoughts. Salsa, seemingly distracted, received a harsh scolding. Turi suddenly remembered that she was once again caught between Garbak and Salsa. Today, Salsa's job is to act as a human shield for her. Overwhelmed with excitement, he rattled on about how he would protect Turi at all costs, even if it meant sacrificing his own life. Turi couldn't help but wonder why Salsa was so eager to be a sacrificial pawn, but if he was willing to be her bodyguard with that kind of spirit, then she wouldn't complain. At least that was one less worry as they prepared for the attack. Turi presented the plan. The mage team would bomb the enemy position first, then the infantry would charge forward. Garbak chimed in, offering his opinion. He explained that even though the mages were carrying out their mission, they couldn't eliminate all the enemies hiding in the trenches. The enemy's defenses were very strong, and they knew exactly what the next step would be, waiting to take down anyone who dared to charge in. A classic scenario where the defender has the advantage, but Turi wasn't exactly optimistic. However, with Salsa still so energetic, it was hard not to feel a little more hopeful, or perhaps simply bewildered by his strange enthusiasm for acting as a human shield. Garbak quickly pointed out to Turi the realities of war. The defender always has the advantage, no matter how many times they are pushed back. They just need to dig deeper and find a new hiding place. Trench warfare is nothing more than an endless cycle. And why? Simply because gunpowder exists. With guns and other weapons, even children can join the battle. Just put a gun in their hands. Anyone can pull the trigger. Turi couldn't help but ask, what was the ultimate goal of all this? Garbak answered bluntly. Before all fell, he would forge a path through the front lines. He wasn't one to beat around the bush. Grabbing Turi by the face, he warned him clearly. If she dared disobey again, he would shoot her on the spot. Turi had to obey and complete the mission. Or not. Garbak smirked, loosened his grip on her, and took a deep breath, savoring the smell of burning flesh. He declared that everything was going according to plan. This time, he was ready to show them how he truly fought. His sword was drawn. He was preparing to turn the enemy into nothing more than a pile of gooey flesh. Blood would be spilled. He ordered a full-scale attack. Gunfire rang out, and the ground shook violently. Garbak charged into battle like a whirlwind, tearing through enemy ranks as if they were nothing. Turi followed closely behind, astonished by his deadly speed and precision. Garbak was nothing short of a killing machine. He cleared the path ahead with ease. Salsa, trying to catch up, wondered if Garbak had been hit by any bullets. But Garbak continued his killing spree, clearly enjoying himself. He calls his enemies nutrients for his sword. Turi, dodging the relentless gunfire, gradually realized one thing. Charging into a hail of bullets without cover could only be the act of someone seeking death. But there was a paradox. The safest place on the battlefield was probably right behind Garbak. So she charged forward. Bullets whizzed by, but in her mind, they meant nothing. Salsa, still struggling to keep up, was completely bewildered. How can Garbak run faster than all of them? Dodging through the gunfire, Turi chuckled softly. This world was a world of magic and swordsmanship. She'd completely forgotten that amidst the mud and death. But now, with Garbak leading the attack, everything seemed to come flooding back to her. This place truly felt like something out of a novel. Or at least, it was the perfect setting for a crazy action scene. Garbak was so fast that Turi and Salsa could barely keep up. Both were struggling to keep pace with him when suddenly, Turi slipped and fell. Salsa, always a good teammate, rushed to help her up, but Garbak had no intention of accepting that. He hit Turi hard, yelling at her for falling behind. His voice boomed with anger, shouting that they would die if they didn't stay close to him. Turi quickly nodded and stood up. She secretly thought that if she made another mistake, she would surely be crushed mercilessly. Just as the situation escalated, Salsa spotted an approaching attack and promptly warned them, saving her by the last minute. He grabbed her hand, and they both immediately ran for their lives. Turi was still trying to process everything that was happening so fast, but he couldn't stop himself from thinking that Salsa looked really cool right now. However, that moment didn't last long, because just when they thought they were safe, the enemy appeared right behind them. Salsa screamed for help in panic, causing Turi's earlier admiration to quickly vanish. Garbak, true to his brutal nature, charged in like a whirlwind, effortlessly cleaving through enemy ranks. He didn't stop there. He punched both Turi and Salsa for their carelessness, then sped off. Turi hurried after her, while Salsa frantically shouted for her to wait. Before long, the three of them were close to the enemy settlement. Turi, somewhat hesitantly, tried to offer some advice, saying that if things continued like this, coordination with other units would be broken. Garbak turned to look at her, waiting for a clearer explanation. Turi, looking somewhat tense, pointed out that our troops were still lagging behind. Garbak, clearly annoyed by the delay, gritted his teeth and ordered the troops to assemble. Turi, now thinking it best not to say anything more, wondered if all of this was simply because Garbak was too eager to charge forward. Just as they were about to continue, they received news that Private Gray had been shot. Gray, though in pain, still tried to apologize to Garbak. However, Garbak remained focused on the overall situation. He immediately called Turi over and asked if she could use magic to heal. Turi, eager to help, nodded. Garbak allowed her to administer first aid and, if necessary, to use medical treatment. Turi, astonished by Garbak's command, suddenly realized that this was the first time she had heard him speak in a way that truly sounded like a commander. Admittedly, it sounds quite believable. After Turi nodded in confirmation, Garbak immediately left. He dragged Salsa along, muttering about having to secure the surrounding area. As Turi approached Gray, she was surprised to see him still smiling, despite his clearly serious injuries. Turi couldn't help but think that Gray's sense of humor seemed a little excessive for someone on the verge of death. She examined the wound, a deep bullet wound that needed immediate treatment. Regaining her composure, she prepared to suck out the clotted blood and use the little healing magic she possessed to stop the bleeding. Although unsure if she could do it perfectly, she remained focused, reminding herself of Gale's training. Breathe, stay calm, and do your best. While she worked, Salsa cheered from the sidelines, and Garbak stood at a distance staring. The healing magic seemed to be working, so Gray subtly moved his leg to test it out. He thanked Turi for her help, although she quickly apologized for not being able to completely heal him. Gray, as optimistic as ever, simply smiled and insisted that stopping the bleeding was all that mattered. Turi handed Gray a bottle of ORS, urging him to drink it quickly. Gray, slightly taken aback by this attention, joked that he would ask her out on a date once he was fully recovered. But Turi, always maintaining a professional demeanor, quietly packed her things, preparing to leave, and reminded Gray to report immediately if she showed any unusual symptoms. Gray, still not giving up the teasing, hoped for some kind of reaction from her, but Turi was clearly not in the mood for jokes. Just then, Garbak intervened, gritting his teeth and ordering Turi to support the allies. He instructed her and Salsa to move to the trench for cover, and they immediately obeyed without hesitation. Before leaving, Turi reassured Gray that if he wasn't shot again, he would surely recover. Gray smiled shyly, reminding her to be careful as well. As Turi walked, she reflected on the chaos of the battlefield. Gunfire still echoed in the distance. The air was thick with the smell of death, and even breathing had become difficult. The ghosts of those who had fallen flashed through her mind. Amidst all of that, the commander's voice rang out, signaling the end of the battle. Turi didn't even realize the fight was over until everything went quiet. She glanced around and spotted a soldier from another platoon trembling and cowering in a corner. Tears streamed down his face. Turi approached, but the soldier quickly covered his ears as if he couldn't bear any more sound. Meanwhile, Garbak was celebrating his victory, his excitement a stark contrast to the somber atmosphere among the rest of the soldiers. He gleefully announced that the platoon had advanced 31 meters, losing only one man. Even though it was only a small victory, it was still a victory. A soldier reported the news to Garbak. It was emphasized that the death of Scout Lendl was the foundation for this success. Turi paused when he first heard that name. She wondered who Lendl was, what kind of person he had been, and where he had fallen. It was all a mystery. A mystery that will probably never be answered. Around her, the soldiers were celebrating. They were excitedly discussing how they would have a big drinking session when they returned, with some even joking that they would bring out the liquor right now. Some men excitedly boasted about how cool their commander was, laughing heartily, but Turi couldn't shake off the nausea rising in his stomach. Salsa noticed Turi's discomfort and anxiously asked if she was all right. Turi tried to ignore him, but Salsa quickly realized she was trembling violently. He insisted they take a break, so they both sat down on the side of the road. After a while, Salsa spoke up and asked why everyone was laughing. Tori tried to explain in the simplest way possible that the tactical objective of the battle had been achieved, and that was why the soldiers were celebrating. Salsa seemed to understand, but his gaze was directed away. Garbak and the other soldiers were smoking and relaxing in the distance. Tori sighed, telling Salsa that if they didn't laugh, they would probably end up in the same miserable state as everyone else here. Every battle is the same, a complete mess when it's over. Suddenly, Gray appeared from behind with his usual goofy grin. He teased them for looking so serious and spaced out. Then, unexpectedly, he pulled them both into a tight embrace, so tight they could barely breathe. He urged them to snap out of it in his usual mischievous style. He said that Turi's sad face looked quite cute, especially when she was so preoccupied with the death of a teammate. She was a little embarrassed, but Gray just smiled faintly and said that he envied how easily she expressed her emotions. He joked that they were all used to being hardened, but if they could get out of this fight, they would be one step ahead. He added that Lendl, who is dead, is probably now enjoying a feast in the afterlife with those who have fallen. Turi, somewhat confused, tried to reply, but when Gray pressed her further, she simply said nothing. Deep down, she couldn't help but think that Gray's carefree smile seemed out of place for someone in the middle of a battlefield. But at that very moment, the order to withdraw was given, and everyone prepared to move. As they walked away, Salsa wondered why he didn't understand. Why would anyone be jealous of the dead? He didn't want to die at all. Turi agreed, saying she didn't want to die either. But then she sighed, adding that if you spend too long on the battlefield, you start to think that way. Salsa still didn't understand, but Turi just nodded and said it depended on the individual. She thought about Gray's personality, which seemed strange, but was gentle in its own way. Salsa remained confused, asking how desiring death could be considered gentle. Turi chuckled softly, telling him not to speak so loudly. She explained that Gray's perspective wasn't one of fear of death for himself. He was simply someone who wanted to believe that his fallen comrades had found peace in the afterlife. Far removed from the suffering of this life, it was a strange kind of tenderness, but it persisted. Turi couldn't help but think that when Gray said those things, he had given up more than anyone else. More than anyone, Gray feared what was to come. At least, that's what Turi believes. Upon returning to base, Commander Garbak organized a drinking session. But exhaustion set in, and everyone nearly collapsed immediately. The next morning, a gloomy dawn arrived, bringing with it a surprise. As the rain poured down, the soldiers scrambled, shouting at each other to erect shelters and get waterproof sheets for each platoon. Salsa, confused, asked if they didn't have umbrellas or raincoats. Gray, with his usual sarcastic tone, told Salsa he'd get those things once he climbed higher. Then, with a smile, he joked that this hailstorm was really intense. He explained how to erect the waterproofing sheet at an angle to prevent water from pooling in the middle. At the same time, he secured the edges firmly. Observing everything, Turi thought that although the rain was inconvenient, it was still a blessing for the crops. Since they couldn't rely on the river, the rain was an opportunity to replenish their much-needed drinking water supply. Salsa, still trying to understand the situation, asked if the deployment would be canceled today because of the rain. Gray calmly explained that fighting in the rain was not recommended. Although grenades are waterproof, swords and bows can still be used, but they weren't as effective as usual. In addition, the slippery ground slowed things down, significantly reducing safety. Sitting in a corner, Turi suddenly thought that it wouldn't be so bad if the rain continued indefinitely. At least it would give them a moment of calm amidst the usual chaos. Seeing Turi nodding off, Salsa shook his head and began to grumble, warning that if he fell asleep, he was doomed. Gray chimed in, agreeing and saying seriously that sleeping in this weather was dangerous, as if it were the greatest threat of all. With a mischievous grin, he teased, asking if he could give her a kiss. Salsa, with her strong protective instincts, immediately told Gray to stop the joke. Meanwhile, Alan gritted his teeth in frustration, muttering curses at the rain. Salsa, still not fully grasping the seriousness of the situation, hesitantly asked if they needed to fight in the rain. Before anyone could answer, Alan, clearly enraged, roared that the rain was their worst enemy. If he were up against humans, he would charge in and fight, nothing to worry about. But in the rain, they are almost useless. Then, true to his style, Alan began talking about his old team. He explained the difference between an assault team and a defense team. The assault team consists of an infantryman, a scout, and a grenade thrower, with the scout undertaking the most dangerous tasks. But the defense team was a completely different story. They consisted of an armored soldier, a mage, a medic, and an engineer. These people specialized in withstanding enemy attacks and constructing defensive structures, such as barbed wire fences or walls. They are always on the front lines, constantly ready to face an attack, living in perpetual tension. It sounds like the most miserable job in the world. Alan chuckled bitterly and began recounting his battlefield experiences. According to him, luxuries like waterproof tarpaulins were a distant dream for his unit. In Alan's squad, it was all about endurance, being submerged in mud, soaked in dirty water, and all sorts of other unpleasant things. The smell of dirty water mixed with, well, you probably understand. But worst of all was the water seeping into their shoes, making everything 10 times worse. Alan revealed the worst thing that had happened on his team, bloody diarrhea. It was a really big problem, and many of his teammates died from dehydration. He said that it was probably one of the most pathetic ways to die, being trapped in your own waste, unable to move. Even wearing shoes is useless, because when the water level rises, dirty water mixed with all sorts of things just seeps inside. It means the worst kind of unexpected attack. But wait, things got worse. In winter, the water was freezing, and getting soaked in the rain only made things worse. My feet were soaking wet, and before I knew it, my toes had started to necrotize. Gray interrupted Alan's complaining, urging him to stop. Alan sighed and then emphasized the terrible rain, explaining that being an assault soldier had its advantages. At least there was shelter. He added that Turi should have been in a hospital bed. However, Gray remarked that medics were also warriors. Alan agreed. But then he recalled an incident where the commander, after taking a bomb blast to the face, still complained that if he had had a medic nearby, he could have continued advancing. Salsa couldn't believe it, asking if the commander really wanted to continue after being so severely wounded. To him it seemed crazy, but Turi pondered it, wondering if it was really that strange. Could one imagine a medic rushing straight to the front lines? Gray tried to keep everyone focused, reminding Salsa to take advantage of the rainy season to learn as the enemy's attack pace slowed down. Alan warned that there would come a day when the commander could no longer always protect him. Gray agreed, saying they should first learn how to move without revealing their position. Salsa, not understanding the seriousness of the situation, joked that he needed to change his running style. Alan warned that if he kept running erratically like that, he would lose his life in minutes. Meanwhile, Turi reflected on how rarely he heard stories from veteran soldiers, and realized that little by little, they were all becoming true soldiers themselves. But then the alarm sounded, signaling a surprise enemy attack, bringing everyone to a state of readiness. Salsa joked that Gray was a liar, but Gray just laughed, pointing out that they were actually under attack. The soldiers quickly took their positions, and Garback immediately stepped out of his tent. While getting dressed, he ordered Alan to report on the situation. Alan reported that in our trenches, about 500 meters to the north, there were multiple explosions caused by enemy magic. The enemy's assault teams have breached the first line of defense. And the second line of defense also seems on the verge of collapsing. Garback angrily cursed, saying that their army was a bunch of cowards lacking any spirit. Alan added that the approaching enemy troops were very skilled, but because they were moving so fast, the situation would become extremely tense. Garback asked about the appearance of the enemy commander. Alan quickly described him as a spear-wielding warrior with long blonde hair, surrounded by lightning. Garback smirked, recognizing him as Kamikiri, the lightning spear demon. Then he jokingly remarked that with the rain and thunder like this, they were about to become slaves to that demon. Alan suggested aiming for his legs to reduce his mobility. Garbak immediately took notice and ordered his men to lure him closer. He felt quite lucky today, so he was ready to enter the battle. Even so, Turi couldn't help but think that Garbak was truly a madman. Garbak then gave Turi some instructions. Just in case things went wrong, he told her to use her healing magic on him if needed. He also instructed Maru to hold Kamikiri off while Alan took him back to the trenches for protection. When Salsa stepped up to ask about his role, Garbak told him that he had to be Turi's human shield once again. Salsa excitedly promised that this time he would protect her properly. But upon hearing this, Turi couldn't help but glance at Salsa, who was clearly being overly enthusiastic. Gray then leisurely approached Turi and repeated Salsa's words, further irritating her. Garbak shouted the order to get ready, quickly bringing everyone back to focus as they prepared for the upcoming battle. When the enemy charged forward, Garbak charged straight into the middle of the battle with his sword raised high. Just as the enemy opened fire, he smirked, mocking them with a sarcastic greeting. "Thank you for coming to die in the rain." Garbak charged forward, slicing down enemies as if they were nothing. Finally, they came face to face with Kamikiri. Salsa cursed under his breath as the lightning struck the ground, while Gray merely smirked, remaining completely unfazed. But Turi was worried. If anything happened to the commander, she wouldn't hesitate to use her healing magic. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning struck. Salsa and Gray immediately rushed to shield Turi. She was surprised and quickly apologized, but they reassured her that she didn't need to. Salsa remains determined to protect his commander and will always be there to keep Turi safe. Amidst the chaotic battle, Garbak gradually closed in on Kamikiri, and with one final slash, he beheaded his enemy, sending the demon's head flying far away. The soldiers opened fire simultaneously, while Garbak leaped into the air with a triumphant grin. Amidst the chaos, Turi tried to focus on the situation. She wondered what would happen next. Suddenly, something unusual appeared in the distance. A grenade flew straight towards them. In that brief moment, she realized she no longer had time to ask Garbak's permission to use magic. So she rushed forward, swinging her arms to create a shield that enveloped everyone. Salsa and Gray froze as the grenade flew toward them, while Turi continued to run, his eyes fixed on only one thing, protecting them all. Gray shouted a warning about the grenade, but Turi was too preoccupied to worry. The most important thing was everyone's lives. She raised her shield just in time. But the explosion came shortly afterward. The intense shock left her reeling, nearly causing her to collapse. Turi opened his eyes, groaning in pain, still unable to believe what had just happened. The last image in her mind was Salsa rushing towards her, calling her name, then the explosion. A sharp pain shot through her body as she turned her head to look at Salsa. He was lying not far away, motionless. Turi tried to call out, but at that moment Gray breathed a sigh of relief when he saw that Turi was still alive. She nodded slightly, weakly calling out Salsa's name. She tried to stand up, but her injured legs prevented her. Gray told her to lie still and offered to carry her, but all she could think about was Salsa. Despair pointed toward him. His body was severely burned. Before she could do anything, Gray stopped her, coldly stating that it was too late. Turi was stunned, trying to resist, but Gray had already called Alan. At that moment, Salsa looked up, her face severely burned and distorted. Turi was stunned, unable to accept the truth as Gray calmly explained that Salsa had done something brave, and it was time for him to rest. Gray carried Turi away. But her eyes remained fixed on Salsa. They still couldn't believe they had made it to the medical camp. Amidst the groans of pain from the soldiers and the surrounding chaos, Turi lay silently among the wounded, overwhelmed by everything. Gale arrived, apologized for being late, and began treating her. Turi weakly called out Gale's name, and she reassured me that it was nothing serious, just a preventative treatment. When Gale checked the bag, he realized it was empty and asked the nurse for another dose. The nurse hesitated, reminding him that they had already given an overdose. But Gale ignored it. He drank it himself, then smirked and ordered the treatment to continue. Gale used magic to heal Turi's legs, while the nurse watched in astonishment. When everything was done, Gale said he would come back to check later, and Turi thanked him in a trembling voice. When Gale left to help others, the nurse turned to Turi, apologizing for the dire situation. She told Turi that the hospital was overwhelmed with wounded soldiers and the painkillers had run out, and even simple things like going to the toilet would become difficult. Turi nodded, understanding the situation. At that moment, the nurse realized something and, surprised, asked why the commander was there. The curtain was pulled aside, and immediately, the commander rushed in to question Turi. The nurse was confused, while Turi, weak and almost unable to move, tried to sit up. The nurse quickly stopped her, advising her to rest. But the commander brushed it aside, giving a cold order before dragging Turi away despite the nurse's protests. Everyone just stood there, stunned, watching them go. In a secluded location, the commander confronted Turi, questioning her about her use of shield-creating magic. The commander reminded Turi of the rules she should have followed. We await an explanation for her violation. Turi sighed, admitting his mistake in a resigned tone. The commander's anger flared up, and he slapped her hard across the face. This left those around him speechless. Without stopping, he continued to slap repeatedly, the rage is escalating. Until Turi was thrown to the ground. Someone tried to intervene, but the commander glared, making them hesitate. Turi coughed violently and trembled as he warned of the consequences of disobeying orders. The commander continued to scold her. She bowed her head, admitting her wrongdoing in a weak voice. The commander gritted his teeth and cursed under his breath, ignoring her condition, and continued to vent his anger with furious punches. He coldly declared that if Turi failed to obey his orders, he would sentence her to death, so that she never has to remember the rule again. Finally, the commander ordered Turi to stand up. His eyes clouded with anger. A person approached, intending to dissuade Garbak, but he ignored her, drawing his sword and threatening her. The other person immediately stepped back. He muttered something under his breath, while his teammates advised him not to interfere in Garbak's affairs. The man the soldiers called the Demon Sword. Garbak continued to punish Turi, repeatedly striking her. Then suddenly he stopped and ordered her to defend herself. Turi tried to erect a shield, but it shattered instantly, further enraging Garbak. He snarled, forcing her to stand up and create another shield. In his despair, Turi thought to himself that it would be better to die than to continue living in torment. Protected by Salsa, she gradually understood the meaning of Gray's earlier words. Just then, Garbak walked in, annoyed by Turi's failure. He coldly explained how to use the magic shield correctly. He guided her step by step to position the shield at an angle. In the end, Turi got it right, and Garbak nodded in satisfaction. Asked if she understood, he continued, emphasizing that it's not about blocking every attack head-on, but rather about deflecting them. Garbak questioned whether Gale, the chief medic, had taught her how to use a shield properly. Turi nodded, but Garbak criticized Gale's limited understanding of warfare. He emphasized that if Turi had known how to use his shield properly when the bomb exploded, the casualties would probably have been much lower. Turi collapsed, realizing that if she had used her shield correctly, Salsa might still be alive. Overwhelmed by guilt, she burst into tears in despair, while Garbak simply stood silently watching. Gale rushed over. He angrily yelled at Garbak for mistreating someone she had just treated. He merely scoffed, calling her an imposter. Gale angrily retorted, vowing to formally protest his actions. But Garbak just smirked. They didn't seem to care much. Turi, lost in a daze, reflect on how Garbak is hated by both allies and enemies. A cursed man destined to drag everyone down to hell with him. She gradually lost consciousness, silently sinking into the darkness. Today, they will face a more dangerous mission than usual. Gale looked at Turi with a serious expression, reminding her that no matter how much progress she made, the battlefield never showed mercy. Turi silently accepted the reminder. After defying orders twice and losing a comrade, she understood that in Garbak's eyes, A reckless person like her was nothing more than a burden to the front lines. But instead of giving up, she clenched her fists, determined to prove herself. Gale remarked that Turi's magical energy and precision had improved significantly. Even if she continues like this, in 6 months she could become a key warrior. However, Turi wasn't thinking that far ahead. Her sole objective now was to survive. She nodded, ready to give it her all. And Gale revealed that she plans to request that Turi be transferred back to medical training. Turi was surprised, wondering if it was due to her failures on the battlefield. But Gale quickly denied it, explaining that it wasn't a matter of her ability, but rather the increasing number of casualties. A player with Turi's potential shouldn't die needlessly on the front lines. Gale also admitted that the harsh discipline Garbak imposed on Turi stemmed in part from the way she taught her shield magic. Turi felt guilty, blaming himself for not reporting his abilities sooner. If she had done that, perhaps things would have been different. Perhaps Salsa would still be alive. Gale went on to share her personal grief, revealing that her younger brother had also died while serving under Garbak. Gale recalled the moment she received her brother's playing card and the cold words Garbak had spoken when he broke the news of his death. Those words still haunt her to this day. She recounts how Garbak used her younger brother as bait to save himself when surrounded by enemy troops, and that disgusts her. Turi listened quietly, surprised by this fact. She asked why Garbak needed a doctor, and Gale responded bitterly, mocking him for his hypocrisy, demanding treatment while simultaneously sending his soldiers to their deaths. However, Gale admitted that she couldn't resist the order. Turi went on to ask if it was the only time she would defy it. Gale replied that she was there of her own choosing, and that wherever she was, she would continue to do her job. After saying that, her eyes welled up with tears. Gale told Turi not to blame herself anymore. She quietly observed Turi, realizing he was a gentle and strong-willed person. As Turi left, Gale called after her, begging her not to die. Stepping outside, Turi let her mind drift back to memories. The time she visited the back of the field hospital. She remembered the soldiers digging large trenches, a scene all too familiar on the front lines. As she walked past a vehicle filled with the bodies of soldiers, she couldn't help but think how lucky they were. Those lucky ones! She recalled the words of her senior medical colleagues. With so many corpses left to decompose, attracting bacteria and becoming breeding grounds for disease, being thrown into a pit and burned alive would probably be a better fate. Turi saw Alan sitting nearby. He took a deep breath and stood up to greet her. Turi said she would return to the unit, but also inquired about Alan's condition, who looked exhausted. Alan evaded the question, but Turi offered to light his fire. They sat down together, and Alan confessed that he felt guilty about the death of a new recruit. He should have spotted the grenade. That was the job of a scout like him. But it wasn't until Turi cast a spell to push it away that he realized how close they had come to death. Alan joked that Turi was the real hero in that moment. Turi suddenly noticed a pile of corpses nearby, including Salsa. When the cremation flames flared up, a soldier offered them a tribute to those who had fallen. Alan calmly reflected that death is not the end. Rather, it is the soul that is liberated, resting in eternal peace. He reminded Turi of his act of saving Salsa, even though it came at a price, but it was a kind deed that would not be forgotten. He believes Salsa will thank Turi for that. Turi reflected on the short life of Salsa. An 18-year-old boy, fresh out of high school, is thrust into war and died just weeks after enlisting. For the surviving soldiers, the most tragic fate was perhaps living in perpetual hell. Turi couldn't help but wonder which fate was better. As they paid their respects to the fallen soldiers, Turi was overwhelmed with emotion, unable to hold back the silent tears that fell after the moment of remembrance. Alan waited a while. He then asked if she was okay returning to her unit alone. Turi reassured him that she was fine and thanked him for his concern. On the way back with the platoon, the newly enlisted soldiers shouted teasingly. He called her adorable and asked if she needed a boyfriend. Turi just shook his head, thinking to himself that these carefree recruits were entering the trenches with such high spirits as if they were going on a picnic with friends, completely unaware of the horrors that awaited them. Upon his return, Turi immediately reported to Commander Garbak. He greeted her with a teasing remark. I asked if she enjoyed her easy job on the home front. After a brief exchange, Turi mentioned that her magical power had increased, and that in her peak condition, she could use healing spells 3 times in a row. After leaving Garbak's tent, Turi announced her return. The soldiers greeted her with playful banter, joking about her work at the hospital, and asking if anyone had given her a hard time. Turi reassured them, saying that everyone had been very kind to her. She then approached Gray, who laughed loudly and joked that they had turned into moles after a whole day of digging holes. Gray even joked that they should dig a tunnel to escape home, making the whole group laugh at the silly idea. Turi listened to the jokes and thought to himself that it was clear everyone had had a little too much to drink. Gray continued to joke about how the commander had been frustrated all day because he couldn't resolve the issue with Kamikiri, resulting in the entire team being punished repeatedly like a game of whack-a-mole. Suddenly, Garbak yelled, telling them to stop drinking and get back to work. He was clearly annoyed. He lit a cigarette. He muttered about how the attack was slowing down while the soldiers were becoming complacent. He ordered them to go and greet the new recruits, as no one had met them yet. At that moment, a sarcastic voice chimed in, remarking that Turi looked smaller than expected, even calling her little girl, clearly expressing disappointment. After returning to the platoon, Turi began to get acquainted with the new recruits. Then, the commander gathered everyone together and ordered the training to begin at the infantry training ground. As Turi was running, she heard Garbak shouting her name, but she kept running, too exhausted to respond. A member of the platoon mocked her for being exhausted after only a short run. While running, Turi thought about the new members. Rodri, a rough private with a not-so-pleasant mouth. Veldi, a corporal and scout, was the highest-ranking officer after Garbak. Nuridome, a quiet private, was difficult to read. Turi felt there was no need to worry too much about them beyond remembering their names, since they weren't friends anyway. At that moment, Garbak ordered the group to run 10 more laps, blaming Turi for tripping, resulting in everyone being penalized. Everyone returned to base. Veldi apologized for causing trouble, but Turi, feeling guilty, said that she was the one who should apologize for getting in the way. Rodri immediately snapped, criticizing Turi for her incompetence and bluntly stating that he would never risk his life to help someone like her. Rodri's words hurt Turi, but she quietly explained that she was merely the commander's personal first aid kit. At that moment, Garbak called Turi over and gave her a new task, training in defensive magic using shields. Turi nodded and was ready to practice. During practice, she succeeded in her defense, and Garbak noticed that her spell-casting speed had improved significantly. However, he pointed out that the angle of the shield was still wrong and asked her to readjust it. Turi heeded the instruction and prepared again. Garbak became more serious and continued to attack. Meanwhile, Turi tried to protect himself with a magic shield. Veldi stood outside observing, commenting that this was just another crazy day for the commander. After pushing Turi to his limits, Garbak admitted that the shape of the shield had become more stable, but he still ordered her to run immediately. Turi hesitated, saying it was already dark and difficult to see, but Garbak ignored her concerns. He joked that since it was nighttime, he could just go to sleep. Reluctantly, Turi started running, and Garbak smiled meaningfully as he looked at her. The training continued, and Garbak pointed out that Turi's spell-casting speed was slowing down. Garbak ordered Turi to maintain a steady pace and keep his spell shield in check, and be vigilant against surprise attacks. Exhausted, she could only weakly reply, thanking him for the training. Garbak casually reminded her that from now on she had to train every day. While running, Turi realized that these grueling training exercises would directly impact his chances of survival. At the end of the training session, she collapsed from exhaustion. Garbak simply ordered her to see Gale the next day. Turi thought to herself, if only she could train like this before going into battle. Perhaps she had prepared better, But now she was so exhausted that if she fainted right here, she might be mistaken for a corpse and thrown into the crematorium. When he returned, Gray approached her and gently patted her head to check on her condition. Gray ordered hot water and remarked that Turi always came back bruised after training with Garbak. She thanked Gray, and he noticed a soldier lying nearby, complaining about the harshness of the training. Gray explained that many new recruits felt the same way. Maru gave Turi her blanket, reminding her that she would be working at the hospital tomorrow and should rest. Turi gratefully accepted and agreed to follow the instructions. Rodri grumbled about how everyone always spoiled Turi just because she was a girl. Gray teased him, asking if he was jealous, which annoyed Rodri, who told him to stop. Later, in a dream, Turi found himself in a peaceful place. He was greeted by Bernie amidst cheerful people. The atmosphere was warm and pleasant, and they all sat down to have a meal together. Suddenly, Turi saw Salsa, his body charred black, mocking her for daring to enjoy all this alone. She frantically called out to him, begging him to come back, but Salsa only choked her, laughing that she should try to fight on the battlefield instead of running away. Turi choked back tears and promised to finish the rest for him, vowing to fight with all her might. When she suddenly woke up, she screamed, but a hand immediately covered her mouth, accompanied by a warning to keep quiet or they would die. Only then did she realize how careless she'd been. A strange pair of hands touched her body, gliding over places that should have woken her up earlier. Her mind raced as the touching continued, panic rising as he began to undress her. Turi was stunned, despairing as she realized the situation was spiraling out of control. Gray woke up with a start, a bad feeling creeping in. Calling Turi's name, he immediately grabbed his gun, pointed it directly at the man and snarled, demanding his identity and purpose. At the same time, he shouted to wake everyone up, ordering them to bring lamps immediately. When the light flared up, the stranger was revealed. It was Nuridome. Recognizing this, Gray immediately became enraged, shouting angrily. He ordered Turi to come closer to him. Nuridome merely sneered, casually uttering derogatory remarks, muttering that he wanted to enjoy a little softness before dying, and then dismissed the matter as nothing serious. He even blamed Turi, brazenly claiming that she had consented and that it was all just a harmless joke. Turi immediately refuted the lie, asserting that it was absolutely not true. Faced with her strong reaction, Nuridome began to panic. Nuridome started screaming, blaming Turi for his impending death. Garbak stepped forward, grabbed Nuridome from behind, and ordered him to shut up. Nevertheless, he continued to scream in a panic. Gray reassured Turi, saying that Nuridome was just a madman, not worth bothering about. Turi, despite the chaos, remained calm. She spoke up, acknowledging that Nuridome's madness stemmed from fear and his experiences on the battlefield. She didn't think he was actually a bad person, just a lost soul caught in his own madness. Hearing those words, Gray smiled slightly, as if agreeing with Turi's thoughts. Meanwhile, Nuridome continued to scream about being cursed, repeatedly calling Turi a murderer. Garbak, losing patience, quelled his frenzy, coldly pointing out that killing on the battlefield was something to be glorified. Gray greeted the platoon commander with a sarcastic "good morning." But Garbak was not in the mood for jokes and criticized the disorganized schedule. He then swiftly addressed the situation, emphasizing that attacking a female soldier was a serious offense. Garbak stated that this behavior violated military regulations and deserved immediate execution. Nuridome panicked, protested, and insisted that he deserved to be tried by a military court. But Garbak coldly asked if those were his last words, ready to record them in the official report. When the situation became so tense it threatened to escalate, someone unexpectedly stepped forward to plead for Nuridome's life. That person suggested the army send him to a re-education camp instead of executing him. Garbak turned to look at the man who had just spoken, Corporal Veldi, and asked if he was overstepping his authority. Veldi remained steadfast, arguing that humans sometimes lose control and questioning Garbak's cold attitude towards the lives of his subordinates. However, Garbak remained unfazed, calmly responding that he would not allow anyone to harm his comrades, even if it put him in danger. Veldy changed tactics, mentioning his uncle, Mr. Renville, implicitly suggesting that he might intervene if this were reported. Garback recognized the political undertone behind the threat and smirked mockingly. With a sarcastic tone, he agreed to hand Nuridome over to Veldy, but warned that if Nuridome caused any more trouble, Veldy would be held responsible. Having said that, Garback left, leaving Nuridome standing there. Tori observed the whole thing, beginning to ponder Veldy's audacity in confronting Garback. She wondered what kind of person he really was. Veldy turned to advise her to forgive Nuridome, saying that he was merely a victim of the internal conflicts and self-destructive instincts that any soldier carries. He even compared the platoon to a family and advised her not to hold too much resentment towards Nuridome. Reflecting on everything, Turi realized that although she initially thought Veldy was straightforward, but the mystery surrounding his personality will probably take time for her to understand him better.